So I want you to just picture the very edge of Casco Bay up in Maine.
Yeah.
And it's the absolute dead of winter. It's January. The temperature has plummeted so far below freezing that the air itself, it almost feels dense.
Like it hurts to breathe.
Exactly. Like you're drawing shattered glass right into your lungs and rolling in off this, this endless black expanse of the Atlantic is a thick, freezing sea fog.
The worst kind of weather.
Yeah. And we're not talking about like a gentle morning mist here.
Yeah.
This is a physical suffocating blanket. It just swallows the landscape. Visibility drops to absolute zero.
You literally can't see your own hands in front of your face.
You can't, but you can hear the ocean. You can hear these massive unseen waves just lifting and crashing violently against the jagged granite rocks right below your boots.
And the sound it's haunting.
It really is. Because as the water pulls back, it makes this terrifying, hollow, kind of sucking sound. Like the sound of an undertow that could just drag a whole house down into the dark. The isolation is total. It's just you, the biting cold, and that creeping realization of how incredibly small you are next to the sheer indifferent power of a pitch-black ocean.
Which is, that is the absolute definition of a hostile environment.
Yeah.
Just standing on the shore, firmly planted on solid earth. The sensory deprivation of that fog and the roar of the water is intimidating enough.
Definitely.
But being out there, actually on the surface of the water, blinded by a freezing mist, knowing that one slight miscalculation in your navigation means your hull is smashed against a submerged reef.
And your crew is just dragged down into the abyss.
Exactly. That invokes a deeply primal terror. The human body is simply not built to survive in a sensory void of ice and salt water.
No, not at all. And that primal terror, that's the exact world we are stepping into today for this deep dive.
Oh yeah, we've got a really dark one today.
We do. We are unpacking this stack of incredibly unnerving sources. We've got historical documents, local folklore articles, old naval registries, and our mission is to piece together the true story of a ship called the Dash.
The Dash.
Yeah. We're going to trace its violent life, its really sudden disappearance, and its terrifying centuries-long afterlife. Because what we're looking at today isn't just, a maritime disaster.
Right.
It is a terrifying descent into a 200-year-old haunting right there on the New England coast.
To understand the gravity of this haunting, we really have to establish a fundamental kind of unspoken rule of maritime history.
Okay, what is that?
The ocean does not easily surrender its dead, but it almost always leaves a receipt.
Leaves a receipt. I like that.
It does. When a massive wooden ship goes down anywhere near a shoreline, the sea spits something back out.
Right, like debris.
Yeah, exactly. The tides bring splintered timber, they bring floating cargo barrels, tangled rigging, shattered masts, or, most tragically, the bodies of the drowned washing up in the salt marsh.
God.
There is almost always physical evidence that a violent event occurred.
It's a grim form of proof, but it's something the families can actually bury.
Precisely.
Mm.
It's awful, but it provides a traumatic yet entirely necessary closure.
Uh-huh.
But the disappearance of the Dash and its 60 crew members in January of 1815, it provided absolutely nothing of the sort.
Just nothing.
A total silent erasure. 60 men sailed into a winter maelstrom and just vanished from the face of the earth.
Wow.
And in a tightly knit maritime community like 19th century New England, where literally every family relies on the sea, a disappearance without a trace, it doesn't heal.
It festers.
It festers. And the void left by those 60 men birthed a legendary phantom. A ghostly vessel that supposedly still prowls the fog-choked coast of Maine to this very day.
But before it became a phantom, the Dash was a very real, incredibly complex machine of war and commerce.
A highly engineered one, too.
Oh, absolutely. So its story begins in 1813 in Freeport, Maine, at this bustling shipyard called Porter's Landing.
Right.
Two brothers, Seward and William Porter, commissioned the build. And if you look at the historical registries, they list the Dash as a 223-ton brig, rigged as a topsail schooner.
Right, which sounds technical, but it's important.
Extremely important, because the defining characteristic of this ship, the single detail that dictated literally everything that happened to it, was its impossible speed.
Yeah.
It was specifically built to be faster than anything else on the Atlantic Ocean.
And we have to remember, speed wasn't a luxury for the Porter brothers.
Right.
It was the only metric of survival. Look at the geopolitical nightmare of 1813.
The War of 1812.
Exactly. The United States is locked in this war. The country is young, its navy is, frankly, laughably small, and it is actively fighting the British Royal Navy.
Which is the biggest superpower in the world at that point.
The most formidable, ruthless, heavily armed maritime superpower on the planet. And the British have thrown this ironclad blockade across the eastern seaboard of the U.S. They're actively choking American supply lines.
So basically, leaving an American port during this time means you are sailing directly into a war zone. You are the prey.
Always. You're always the prey. So initially, the Dash is operating as a merchant vessel. Its job is to run Maine lumber down to the Caribbean and bring back, valuable commodities like coffee.
Okay.
But to complete that route in 1813, the crew has to run a deadly gauntlet. They had to slip past these massive British frigates that are out there specifically hunting for American cargo.
Right, and if they get caught.
If they get caught, the British will seize the goods, burn the ship to the waterline, and likely impress the crew.
Which is just awful.
It is. Impressment was basically a legalized form of kidnapping.
Yeah.
American sailors were forced at gunpoint into servitude aboard British warships.
Yes.
Yeah. So the Porter brothers, they couldn't afford to build a heavily armored galleon to try and fight off a British frigate. They had to build a ship that could outrun the guns.
Which brings up a really interesting technical question from the sources. I kept reading the designation topsail schooner in the naval registries.
Right.
How does the physical design of the sails translate to that kind of survival speed? I mean, for someone who isn't a sailor.
It basically comes down to harnessing fluid dynamics. So a traditional square-rigged ship, like those massive British warships, has rectangular sails hung across the ship.
Okay.
Those are incredible for catching a wind blowing directly from behind, right? It pushes the massive way forward. But they are terrible if the wind is blowing from the side.
Oh, I see.
But a schooner utilizes fore and aft rigging. The sails run lengthwise along the ship.
Right, front to back.
Exactly. This aerodynamic design allows a schooner to sail much closer to the wind, meaning it can zigzag or tack at really sharp angles.
Okay, so they can maneuver.
Yes, and by rigging the Dash as a topsail schooner, the builders gave it this amazing hybrid capability. It had the square topsails for explosive speed when the wind was behind them.
And the fore and aft sails to outmaneuver the lumbering British warships if the wind shifted.
Exactly. It was an absolute engineering marvel of evasion.
But, building a fast ship is one feat of engineering, right? Maintaining that speed in the water is something else entirely.
Oh, yeah. The maintenance was brutal.
Brutal is an understatement. The accounts describe this desperate tactical maneuver the crew utilized that just sounds incredibly dangerous.
It really does.
Because the British had a massive technological advantage. Copper-lined hulls.
Right.
The copper plating prevented barnacles, tube worms, seaweed, all of that from latching onto the wood beneath the waterline. It kept the British ships sleek, smooth, and hydrodynamically efficient.
And the Americans didn't have that.
No, they didn't have the funds or the raw materials for copper. So the crew of the Dash had to utilize a mixture of soap and tallow.
Tallow being heavily rendered animal fat.
Yeah. Boiling hot animal fat mixed with crude lye soap.
Which smells amazing, I'm sure.
Oh, I'm sure it was foul. But I'm trying to visualize the physical reality of applying this stuff because they didn't have modern mechanized dry docks back then.
No cranes lifting the boats out of the water.
Right. So to coat the bottom of a 223-ton vessel, the crew had to engage in this terrifying physical process called careening.
Careening is a total nightmare of maritime labor.
Explain how that works.
Well, you have to sail the vessel into a secluded, shallow harbor and wait for the high tide.
Okay.
Then, as the tide recedes, the crew uses an elaborate, massive system of block and tackle ropes. They'd anchor them to sturdy trees on the shore or even to their own reinforced masts.
Right.
And they use those ropes to physically heave the entire ship over until it is lying completely on its side in the exposed mud.
It just sounds so wrong. Like a ship shouldn't be on its side, and it's entirely defenseless while this is happening, right?
Completely paralyzed.
I'm...
If a British patrol boat comes around the peninsula while your ship is lying on its side in the mud, I mean, the engagement is over before it begins.
Yeah, you can't fight back.
You can't load or fire your cannons because the deck is vertical. You can't flee. You are a stationary target, entirely at the mercy of the enemy.
So while the ship is pinned on its side like that, the crew is frantically hacking away barnacles with iron scrapers.
Racing against the tide.
Racing the tide, exactly. And then slathering the bare wood with this boiling hot vat of animal fat and soap. It honestly reminds me of, like, the ablative heat shields on early spacecraft.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Right. Those shields were designed to physically burn away during atmospheric reentry, just to protect the capsule. The soap and tallow acted the exact same way.
Yes.
As soon as the dash hit the ocean, the salt water began dissolving the fat.
The friction of the ocean is constantly stripping their armor away.
Yeah.
And, the psychological toll of that reality must have been immense for the crew.
Oh, constantly worrying about it.
Exactly. On day one of a voyage down to the Caribbean, the hull is slick, and the dash is the fastest thing on the water. But day by day, week by week, that marine growth slowly returns.
The drag increases.
The ship grows increasingly sluggish.
Mhm.
Every mile they sail, they know their only defense mechanism is literally dissolving into the sea behind them. They're sailing on a ticking clock of vulnerability.
And speaking of vulnerability, the psychological warfare they engaged in to survive is deeply unnerving.
The bluffing.
The bluffing. Because during its time as a merchant vessel, the Dash couldn't carry heavy iron cannons. It would have weighed the ship down and just destroyed their speed advantage.
Right.
So if they encountered a British ship and couldn't outrun it immediately, they had to bluff. They utilized what the historical records refer to as Quaker guns.
Which is such a brilliant, terrifying illusion.
Because the Quakers are famously pacifists. So a Quaker gun is a pacifist weapon.
Meaning it's a fake.
Total fake. The crew took heavy wooden logs, carved them to match the dimensions of an artillery piece, painted them pitch black, and just shoved them out the gun ports of the ship.
I want you to put yourself in the mind of an American sailor on the deck of the Dash during one of those encounters.
Oh, God.
Right. You are looking across a span of open water at a heavily armed British frigate. You know for a fact that the British are armed with 18-pounder cannons,
Which are devastating.
weapons capable of hurling a solid iron sphere through a foot of solid oak from a mile away. If they fire, your hull will shatter into shrapnel, literally tearing the crew apart. And your only defense is to stand next to a painted piece of pine, light a slow match to make it look active, and just pray the silhouette in the fog is convincing enough to make the British captain hesitate.
The tension of that is unthinkable.
Unbearable.
Because if the British call your bluff if they fire a single warning shot across your bow, you cannot answer it.
No.
You just have to stand there gripping a musket, knowing you brought a painted tree branch to a naval artillery duel. It's a miracle they survived a single voyage under those conditions.
But they did survive. They used that speed and that nerve to slip through the blockades repeatedly. However, the nature of the conflict was changing.
Right.
The war escalated.
Exactly. By the summer of 1814, the war had escalated into brutal economic strangulation. The British blockade was suffocating New England. Running lumber and coffee was no longer a viable strategy for the Porter brothers.
So they decided to completely change the identity of the Dash.
A total reinvention. They pull the ship in for a radical overhaul. The merchant disguise is abandoned, and the Porter brothers secure a highly coveted piece of government documentation, a letter of marque signed by President James Madison and Secretary of State James Monroe.
Right.
And this piece of paper legally commissions the Dash as a privateer.
And we really need to define exactly what a privateer is here, because it's a distinct, deeply violent profession.
It's not the Navy.
No, a privateer is not a commissioned naval warship. It is a privately owned civilian vessel that has been granted legal authorization by a sovereign government to attack, capture, and plunder enemy ships.
So it is stripped of its diplomatic veneer, government-sanctioned piracy.
That's exactly what it is. They are hunting for profit. The letter of marque turns the Dash from prey into an apex predator.
And to fulfill this new violent mandate, command is given to Captain William Kimmett, and the ship is heavily militarized.
The Quaker guns go overboard.
The Quaker guns are tossed into the harbor. In their place, the builders install 2 real 8-pound cannons and 1 massive, terrifying centerpiece, a long 32-pound pivot gun.
Which, a 32-pound pivot gun fundamentally changes the tactical geometry of a naval battle.
How so?
Well, standard cannons were mounted on wooden carriages that only face outward from the sides of the ship.
Right.
To aim them, you had to turn the entire ship.
Oh, right. Broadside.
Exactly. But a pivot gun is mounted on a rotating track right on the center of the deck. This allows the crew to swing this massive iron barrel in a nearly 360-degree arc.
Oh, wow.
So they could fire a 32-pound sphere of solid iron, a projectile heavy enough to instantly dismast an enemy ship or crush its hull, while the Dash was actively zigzagging away at top speed.
That's incredible.
It is a devastating combination of mobility and lethal force.
And with this new arsenal, the Dash just goes on an unprecedented rampage across the Atlantic.
Yeah, they do.
The historical records document 15 victorious encounters. 15 times they engage enemy vessels, and 15 times they conquer them.
It's unheard of.
They capture ships loaded with rum, sugar, cocoa, and gold. The prize money just floods into Maine. The Porter brothers and the crew become immensely wealthy.
But this streak of dominance introduces a deeply dangerous psychological element to our story.
Hubris.
Hubris, exactly. The concept of hubris born from an illusion of invincibility.
Because the legend of the ship's luck during this time is staggering. Through 15 violent naval engagements in an active war zone, the Dash is never hit by a single hostile shot.
Not one.
Not one cannonball strikes her hull. Furthermore, no enemy ship that the Dash decides to pursue ever escapes. It is a flawless, unblemished record of absolute supremacy. 0 casualties, 0 structural damage, total victory.
And from a behavioral standpoint, a flawless survival record in a lethal environment is incredibly dangerous.
How do you mean?
Well, think about how humans learn. We learn caution by surviving near misses. A soldier survives an ambush, a sailor survives a shattered mast, and they learn a deep, abiding respect for the chaos of their environment.
Right, they know it can all go wrong in a second.
Exactly. But when you never experience the near miss, when your speed and your firepower always overwhelm the enemy before they can even scratch your paint, you stop respecting the danger.
You think you're untouchable.
You start to believe that you are immune to the laws of probability.
Let's challenge that premise, though. When you look at those 15 victories in the sources, are we seeing the results of highly skilled, tactical geniuses operating a superior machine? Or are we just looking at immense survivor's bias?
That's the million-dollar question.
Have they just rolled the dice 15 times and gotten extraordinarily lucky, and they're mistaking that random luck for immortality?
The historical evidence points heavily towards survivor's bias. I mean, they were undoubtedly skilled sailors, don't get me wrong, but the ocean and the chaos of early 19th century naval combat are utterly unpredictable.
Yeah.
You cannot control sudden drop in the wind or a lucky shot from a desperate enemy gunner. Their unbroken streak bred a fatal overconfidence.
They thought they were gods out there.
They began to believe that the Dash could outrun anything, not just British artillery, but the laws of nature itself. They really believed their ship was untouchable.
And that fatal overconfidence completely sets the stage for January 1815.
Final voyage.
The final voyage. It is the absolute harshest, most unforgiving time of year to navigate the North Atlantic.
Yeah, January is brutal.
The Dash is docked in Portland Harbor preparing for its 16th voyage. Captain Cammett has stepped down, and command has been handed over to Captain John Porter, who is a younger man from the wealthy family that owns the vessel.
Paint the environment of that departure for us, because it really sets the mood.
Okay, so January in Maine is agonizingly cold. The wooden deck of the Dash would have been coated in a slick layer of morning frost.
Slippery freezing.
Yeah, the intricate web of rigging ropes would be frozen stiff. The sky above Portland Harbor was likely a heavy, bruised gray, signaling an impending snowstorm. The ocean looked like slate.
Right. It is an environment that actively repels human life.
Yeah, it really is. And the sources focus on a specific, deeply unsettling moment during this departure.
This is the part that always gets me.
It's so eerie. Captain John Porter is a young newlywed. He has just married his wife. The ship is fully loaded and provisioned. The crew is ready. The sails are prepped. A sister privateer ship, the Chamberlain, is anchored nearby, ready to sail alongside them.
Everyone is waiting.
Everyone is waiting. But Captain Porter refuses to board. He lingers on the freezing shore, saying goodbye to his young wife long past the scheduled departure time.
And we have to emphasize, this is not just a prolonged hug.
No.
It is a profound, almost paralyzing hesitation. He delays the voyage so drastically that his crew on the Dash is forced to load and fire a heavy signal cannon just to get his attention.
Which is insane.
A concussive blast echoing across the ice of the harbor, effectively demanding that the captain assume his post.
And he ignores it.
He just ignores it.
He stays on the dock with his wife. It takes a second blast from the signal cannon before he finally, reluctantly, pulls himself away from her, walks down the pier, and steps onto the deck of his ship.
That moment haunts the entire narrative. I mean, what was happening in John Porter's mind during that delay?
Right.
Was it merely the sorrow of a young man deeply in love, dreading the misery of a freezing month at sea? Or was it something far more primal?
Like a bad feeling.
Was it a creeping, terrifying premonition of doom?
when you really dwell on the human emotion of that transition, it's agonizing.
It really is.
Because you're standing on the immovable earth. You're holding the person you love. And you're staring out into the freezing, unpredictable black void of the winter Atlantic.
Knowing the mortality rates of 19th century sailors.
Exactly. The freezing wind is tearing at your coat, and every biological instinct you possess is screaming at you to stay by the fire.
Don't get on the boat.
Right. But your family name, your duty, and the legendary reputation of your quote-unquote lucky ship demand that you step off the earth and surrender yourself to the ocean.
The psychological friction of leaving the safety of the hearth for the lethal indifference of the sea is immense. And in retrospect, knowing what is coming, it's deeply tempting to view that hesitation as the universe, or his own subconscious, offering him one final chance to walk away.
Just walk away.
But the hubris of the Dash was too strong. The ship had never failed. He was a porter. He had to sail.
So the Dash casts off. They leave Portland Harbor in tandem with the Chamberlain. And for the first 48 hours, the narrative from the sources provides this cruel, false sense of security.
The total trick.
The winter seas are relatively calm. The crews of both heavily armed privateers are in high spirits, actively racing each other through the freezing water, testing the legendary speed of the Dash against the Chamberlain.
It just feels like the beginning of another routine, highly profitable voyage.
But the ocean is the master of deception. It allows you to feel completely in control right up until the exact second it decides to annihilate you.
Beautifully put and terrifyingly true.
Slowly, imperceptibly at first, the atmospheric conditions begin to degrade.
The accounts describe the men feeling the barometric pressure plummet.
You can feel it in your ears.
You can. The air grows heavy. Massive, dark cloud formations begin to stack on the horizon, choking out the pale winter sun. The ambient temperature drops even further. And then the wind violently shifts.
It stops blowing steadily from the west
and whips around, screaming out of the northeast.
And in the maritime culture of New England, a violent shift to a northeast wind is the ultimate harbinger of destruction.
Oh, absolutely.
It signals the birth of a nor'easter. And we should clarify this is not a standard winter rainstorm.
Not at all. A nor'easter is a massive cyclonic storm system fueled by the collision of cold Arctic air and warmer ocean currents.
It acts like a winter hurricane.
Exactly. It brings blinding horizontal snow, freezing sleet, hurricane-force winds, and monstrous wave development. For a wooden ship caught miles from shore, it is a death sentence.
And the moment that northeast wind hits, the captains of the two ships are forced to make a critical decision. And this is the exact moment where the hubris of the Dash seals its fate.
The split.
The split. The captain of the Chamberlain feels the violent pull of the wind, looks at the black wall of clouds rolling toward them, and instantly recognizes the existential threat. He abandons the race, orders his crew to alter course, and makes a desperate plunging run south toward the safety of the coastline.
The Chamberlain chooses caution. They respect the lethal capability of the ocean, and they choose to survive.
But Captain John Porter, aboard the Dash, makes the fatal divergent choice.
He decides to hold his course.
He leans into the storm. He believes that the legendary speed of his vessel, the ship that has outrun every British frigate it ever faced, can outrun a winter hurricane.
It's the ultimate climax of their illusion of invincibility. The Dash has never lost a race. It has never taken damage. Porter simply cannot conceive of a scenario where his ship is overpowered, not even by the atmosphere itself.
So he orders the sails to remain hoisted, driving the ship directly into the teeth of the gale.
And the final sighting of the Dash is a terrifying, really cinematic image recorded by the crew of the fleeing Chamberlain.
Right, they look back.
Through the freezing rain and the failing light, they look back over their shoulders. They watch the Dash leaning hard, banking violently into the wind, plowing forward into a wall of black clouds.
It's at the dark.
The darkness and the snow descend, the visibility drops to zero, and the white sails of the Dash simply dissolve into the maelstrom. And that is the very last time the Dash and its 60 men are ever seen by mortal eyes.
We must pause here, though, to reconstruct what those final hours must have been like for those 60 men, based on the meteorological reality of their location.
Yeah, we have to look at where they were.
Because based on their trajectory and speed, the Dash was likely caught near George's Bank, roughly 60 miles offshore.
And George's Bank is a uniquely dangerous oceanographic feature.
Why is that?
Well, it's a highly elevated, shallow plateau on the seafloor. When a massive storm surge, driven by hurricane-force winds, rolls over deep water and suddenly hits that shallow shelf, the kinetic energy has nowhere to go but up.
Oh, God.
The waves do not just swell, they stand up into towering, incredibly steep walls of water that break with devastating, crushing gravitational force.
Try to place yourself on the wooden deck of that ship in the pitch black of the storm. There is zero ambient light. The only thing you can see is the phosphorescent white foam of 40-foot waves crashing over the bow.
It's terrifying.
The sound of the wind tearing through the rigging is a physical pressure in your ears, a roar so deafening that you cannot hear the man screaming for help right next to you.
And we have to factor in the biological reality of freezing to death at sea. The ocean spray crashing over the deck is supercooled. The moment it hits the wooden deck, the ropes, the sails, and the men's clothing, it instantly freezes into solid ice.
So you can't even move the ship.
The physical operation of the ship becomes impossible. The ropes are frozen into iron bars. The crew's hands are numb, frostbitten, and physically tearing open as they desperately try to haul lines that simply will not budge.
The ship is pitching so violently that men are being thrown across the icy deck. They're desperately lashing themselves to the masts with frozen ropes just to avoid being washed into the black abyss.
And underneath the physical agony is the creeping psychological horror.
That their luck ran out.
The realization among those 60 men that their legendary luck was a lie. All the soap and tallow, all the speed, all the pivot guns in the world cannot stop a 50-foot wave carrying the weight of a concrete building from crashing down onto your deck.
At some point during that endless night, the structural integrity of the dash failed.
It had to.
Perhaps a rogue wave struck them broadside and rolled the ship completely upside down, trapping the men underneath. Perhaps the violent pitching snapped the mainmast, tearing the deck open and allowing the freezing ocean to instantly flood the hull.
We don't know.
The exact mechanism of destruction is unknown, but the end was freezing, violent, and utterly without mercy. The ship went down, dragging all 60 men into the dark waters over Georgia's bank.
And fulfilling the grim premise we discussed at the very beginning of this journey.
Right. There is no receipt.
No wreckage is ever found.
None. In the days and weeks after the storm clears, not a single shattered plank of wood, not a shredded piece of sailcloth, not a single drowned body washes up on the shores of Maine. The dash does not leave a trace. It is simply erased from reality.
And that complete lack of physical evidence is the exact catalyst that transitions the story from a tragic maritime disaster into a lasting psychological phenomenon.
The haunting.
We have to examine the emotional wreckage on land. The storm passes. The Chamberlain limps back into port safely. And then the families of Freeport wait.
Imagine the slow torture of those weeks of silence. The young wife of Captain Porter, standing on the exact same freezing dock where he hesitated, staring out at the empty horizon.
Day after day.
A week passes. Nothing. A month passes. The slow, agonizing realization metastasizes through the community that 60 of their sons, brothers, and husbands are gone.
But without wreckage, human psychology struggles to process the finality of death.
Right. How do you grieve nothing?
In modern psychology, this is known as ambiguous loss. It creates a paralyzing emotional void. If you cannot bury a body, if you cannot see the shattered hull of the ship on the rocks, a primal, irrational part of your brain will always harbor a sliver of hope.
You'll always wonder.
You will always wonder if they survived, if they are marooned on some distant shore, if they're just lost in the fog trying to find their way home. Closure is biologically and psychologically impossible to achieve.
And it is exactly within that desperate, agonizing void that the legend of the Phantom is born. Months, and then years after the disappearance, eerie, hushed reports begin to trickle into the taverns and docks from seasoned local fishermen.
And note the specific environmental conditions of these sightings. They do not occur on bright, sunny afternoons.
No.
They happen only when the weather replicates the exact atmospheric isolation we discussed earlier. Times of dead calm, accompanied by thick, freezing fog rolling over Casco Bay.
Let's relay one of these encounters from the local folklore because the details are incredibly cinematic and terrifying.
Oh, please do.
So, a lone fisherman is working his lines in Casco Bay. It is a calm day, but the sea fog has rolled in so incredibly thick that he cannot see the bow of his own small boat.
Total whiteout.
Total whiteout. The water is totally flat, rolling like dark, heavy oil. There is absolutely no wind. His sails are slack. The silence is absolute. And then, cutting through that silence, he hears it.
The massive, heavy sound of a large ship displacing water. The deep groan of heavy oak timbers under stress. The sharp snap of thick canvas sails pulling taut, the violent splashing of a heavy bow breaking the surface of the ocean.
But there is no wind to drive a ship of that magnitude.
Exactly.
The sound grows rapidly louder, bearing down on him at impossible speed. He panics, blindly grabbing his oars to row out of the path of destruction, and suddenly, violently, out of the impenetrable white mist, this enormous wooden vessel emerges.
Right over him.
It is a ship from another century. It is a heavily armed privateer from the War of 1812, materializing in modern waters, moving at a fierce, terrifying velocity entirely independent of the weather.
And the physical details reported by terrified eyewitnesses over the centuries are always identical and deeply unsettling.
What are they?
The sails of the ship are completely full and straining, despite the dead calm air. The hull slices through the water, but it leaves absolutely no wake behind it.
No wake. That's so creepy.
Just undisturbed water. But the detail that truly elevates this to horror is the crew.
The fishermen claim they can see the men on the deck. But this isn't a crew fighting a storm or working the rigging.
Oh.
They are standing perfectly still. They are absolutely silent, their faces pale, staring straight ahead with blank, hollow eyes, forever looking toward the port they can never reach.
Shudder-inducing.
And as the massive ship glides silently past the terrified fisherman in his small boat, he catches a glimpse of the stern. There, painted on a weathered, rotting wooden board, the name is perfectly legible. Dash from Freeport.
Wow.
And then, just as quickly as it violently appeared, the ship melts back into the fog, taking the sound and the nightmare with it.
It is a breathtaking piece of folklore, and it marks a profound mythological shift.
How so?
Because the Dash has ceased to be a historical shipwreck and has ascended to the realm of the paranormal. And this is not a new human concept. By becoming a phantom, the Dash steps into the ancient archetype of the Flying Dutchman.
Right, the legendary ghost ship cursed to sail the oceans forever, bringing doom to anyone who spots it off the Cape of Good Hope.
Exactly. It also heavily mirrors the mythology of Charon, the ferryman of the river Styx in Greek myth, ferrying the souls of the dead across the dark water to the underworld. The Dash transcends Maine history to become a universal manifestation of our fear of the unknown.
And like all enduring folklore, the rules governing the phantom begin to solidify as the story is passed down through generations. The sightings are no longer considered random.
No, they have a purpose.
The ghost ship is given a specific, chilling purpose. It becomes a harbinger.
The generational curse.
Yes. This is where the legend turns deeply personal and intimately terrifying. The folklore dictates a rigid rule. The Dash only returns to Casco Bay when a loved one, or a direct descendant of one of the original 60 doomed crewmen, is about to die.
His helmet.
It is. The ship is seen materializing out of the fog, sailing straight and fast for the shore, as if it is rushing to collect a soul, only to melt into nothingness the exact moment its bow touches the land.
It is a fascinating evolution of a ghost story. It transforms the historical grief of the original families into a permanent hereditary condition. The descendants, no matter how many generations removed, are forever biologically tied to the fate of the ship.
But, if this were just a campfire story from the 1880s, it would be easy to dismiss.
Sure.
But the historical sources contain a documented modern account that grounds this ancient legend in recent reality.
The 1975 story.
The year is 1975. The subject is a journalist named Sam Smith. And we need to be clear about who Sam Smith is.
He's not a crackpot.
No. He is a highly respected, deeply credible investigative journalist. He covered Washington politics under 9 different U.S. presidents.
Right.
He helped found the National Green Party. He is a man who deals in verified facts, not paranormal theories.
He is basically a hostile witness to the supernatural.
Yeah.
He has zero reason to invent a ghost story.
None. So in 1975, Sam is visiting his parents at a house near the coast in Harpswell, Maine. It is a completely mundane afternoon. They were having a casual lunch. His mother is looking out the window, staring across the water of the bay.
Just normal day.
Completely normal. Out of nowhere, she pauses her sentence and casually remarks that she can see the ghost ship of Harpswell sailing out on the water.
And Sam's initial reaction is deeply relatable. He dismisses it entirely.
Right, as you would.
He likely rolls his eyes, assumes she is caught up in local romanticism, ignores the comment, finishes his meal, and goes about his day.
But the horrifying reality check comes just a few hours later.
Yeah.
Down on the shore, completely unexpectedly and without any prior medical warning, Sam Smith's father suffers a massive, catastrophic heart attack and dies on the spot.
I mean, the shock and immediate trauma of that sudden death would be overwhelming.
Devastating. Hours later, Sam and his mother are returning from the hospital. They're walking back into the empty house, still reeling from the sudden violence of this loss. Suddenly, his mother cries out, "The ghost ship of Harpswell."
She remembers.
They rush inside, pull a volume of John Greenleaf Whittier's poetry off the bookshelf. Whittier wrote famously about the local legends, and they realize that the phantom ship she saw, the omen that sailed past their window just hours before the sudden death of her husband, perfectly matched the description of the Dash.
Let's analyze the deeply unsettling nature of that account. Because what makes it so horrifying is the sheer banality of the sighting.
It happened at lunch.
Exactly. The mother was not gripped by terror when she saw the ship. The skies didn't turn black. The supernatural intruded upon a completely normal Tuesday lunch, delivered his lethal omen, and took a life with absolute, quiet indifference. The horror is entirely retrospective.
I do have to challenge this, though. Could she have just seen a regular, modern, schooner-like a tourist ship or a historical replica sailing through the bay, and the trauma of her husband's death hours later caused her mind to retroactively assign supernatural meaning to it?
From a purely skeptical standpoint, that is highly probable. I mean, the human brain is a pattern recognition machine.
Right.
When we suffer a profound sudden trauma, our minds frantically search backward in time for clues, for warnings, for a reason why the terrible thing happened. If she saw a boat with sails, her traumatized mind might easily connect it to the local folklore to give the random tragedy a sense of narrative structure.
That makes total sense.
However, whether the ship was real timber or supernatural fog, the psychological effect is identical. The legend of the harbinger is reinforced by real human death.
But the sources reveal a fascinating contradiction in the folklore. We have the Dash acting as a terrifying harbinger of death, the omen that ruins families, but there's a dueling, entirely opposite legend.
Or the protector myth.
Yes. Other mariners and lobstermen off the coast of Harpswell claim something incredibly different. They claim the Dash is a spectral protector.
A guardian angel, but one constructed out of rotting wood and manned by drowned sailors.
Exactly. These mariners claim that when a terrible nor'easter is brewing, or when a modern fishing boat loses its radar and navigation in the blinding fog and is drifting dangerously close to the submerged granite reefs, the Dash will emerge from the mist.
But not to kill them.
No, it does not bring death. Instead, it deliberately sails ahead of the distressed vessel. It leads them safely through the treacherous shoals, guides the lost sailors to the mouth of the harbor, and then vanishes back into the fog just as the storm breaks.
It is a total inversion of the harbinger myth. Instead of the dead returning from the abyss to drag the living down with them, the dead are returning to intercede, saving the living from suffering the exact same horrific fate they endured in 1815.
Which really forces us to ask a deep psychological question. Why does human nature require us to assign an emotional motive to a ghost? The ocean is just water, wind, and gravity. It possesses no malice, but it possesses no mercy either. It is brutally indifferent. Are we simply projecting our own desperate desires onto these legends?
That's a loop.
Do we invent the harbinger because we are terrified of random death and want a warning before tragedy strikes? And do we invent the protector because we desperately need to believe that the dead are watching over us?
We project these motives because the alternative is psychologically unbearable. The sheer indifference of the ocean is terrifying. You cannot negotiate with a hurricane.
Right.
You cannot ask a 50-foot rogue wave for mercy. So we invent the ghost ship to give the ocean a face, an intention, and a morality. If the Dash is a harbinger, then death isn't random. There are rules, omens, and warnings.
It makes sense of the chaos.
Exactly. And if the Dash is a protector, then the 60 men who drowned didn't die for absolutely nothing. Their suffering granted them the power to save others. We humanize the void because accepting that 60 men died for no reason in a random winter storm and the universe does not care is a truth too heavy to carry.
We build monuments out of folklore to cope with the void. And speaking of the dark realities of the ocean, we need to dive into the final, deeply disturbing section of our sources.
This is where it gets really weird.
Because the legend of the Dash eventually collides with the paranoia, the militarization, and the very real violence of the 20th century. There is fresh blood in the water in Casco Bay, and it completely alters the atmosphere of this haunting.
This transition brings us to a very bizarre, heavily repeated rumor in the folklore that places the 19th century ghost ship right in the middle of World War II.
The rumor, which you can find in numerous folklore books, goes like this. During WWII, The coast of Maine is heavily militarized. The U.S. and its allies are constantly patrolling for German submarines.
U-boats.
Right. The story claims that a British warship patrolling Casco Bay is suddenly swallowed in a thick, freezing sea fog. As they are creeping blindly through the mist, the crew suddenly sees a massive, anachronistic wooden ship emerging from the whiteout, bearing straight down on them.
And in the panic of wartime, they don't see a ghost. They see a disguised enemy vessel or an immediate physical threat.
Panic sets in. The story specifically names this British ship as the HMS Moidor. According to the myth, the captain of the Moidor orders his gunners to open fire. They unleash heavy, modern naval artillery directly into the hull of the Dash.
But it's a ghost.
Right. The ghost ship simply absorbs the kinetic energy. The explosive shells pass harmlessly through the ethereal wood. The Dash continues its silent, terrifying trajectory right past the warship and then vanishes back into the fog, leaving the British crew in absolute trembling shock.
It is an incredibly cinematic narrative. I mean, it pits the destructive power of modern industrialized warfare against the ancient, unstoppable force of the supernatural.
It's a great story.
But examining this through the lens of historical reality, we have to completely dismantle this myth to reveal the true monster hiding in the fog.
Because when you actually dig into the naval registries for this ship,
There is no HMS Moidor. The ship did not exist. It's not in the British Naval Registry. It is not in the American Registry. A moidor is actually an old Portuguese gold coin that was heavily circulated during the privateering era of the early 1800s.
oh, fascinating.
Yeah, it's a word heavily associated with pirate loot and prize money. The entire WWII encounter is a fabrication, a tall tale that likely blended the privateering history of the Dash with the intense, very real wartime paranoia of the 1940s.
But, and this is where the story shifts from a ghost story into real-life horror, while the ghostly encounter with the Moidor is a myth, there was a profoundly terrifying true event of sudden violence and mass death that happened in those exact same waters during that exact same war.
The paranoia in Casco Bay was entirely justified.
The Nazis actually reached the coast of Maine.
They did.
Yeah.
We have to reconstruct the sinking of the USS Eagle 56 because this is real-world terror.
Set the scene for us.
Okay, the date is April 23rd, 1945. Think about the geopolitical context of that date. World War II in Europe is literally weeks away from ending. Hitler is trapped in his bunker in Berlin. The war is effectively over.
Right, the end is in sight.
The USS Eagle 56 is an American patrol boat operating in Casco Bay, just a few miles off the coast of Cape Elizabeth, directly in the waters where the Dash is said to roam.
So the psychological state of the American crew on that boat was likely relaxed. They are operating in home waters, within sight of the Maine shoreline. The global conflict is winding down. They are towing targets for dive bomber practice. They feel safe.
But lurking beneath the freezing surface, operating with absolute stealth and total silence, is a German U-boat, specifically U-853.
U-853 is a rogue element. The commander of the submarine had either not received the transmission that the war was collapsing, or he had received it and actively chosen to ignore it.
They were still hunting. They were stalking the American coast, looking for blood.
The mechanics of a U-boat attack are designed for maximum psychological terror. There is no warning. There is no declaration of combat. You are simply sailing on a quiet afternoon and suddenly the water erupts.
Without breaking the surface, in the freezing waters of Casco Bay, U-853 acquires the USS Eagle 56 and fires a torpedo directly into the midsection of the American patrol boat.
Jesus.
The kinetic and explosive destruction is instantaneous and absolutely catastrophic. The torpedo detonation literally blows the patrol boat in half. The men on board have zero time to react, zero time to brace. They are violently thrown into the freezing, turbulent waters of the Atlantic.
It is a massacre within sight of the American homeland. Out of a crew of 62 men on the Eagle 56, only 13 survived the explosion and the freezing water. 49 American sailors are killed, violently and unexpectedly murdered by a ghost submarine that shouldn't have been there.
The horror of the torpedo strike is profound, but what happens next adds a layer of bureaucratic psychological terror to the tragedy that is hard to fathom.
The cover-up.
The U.S. Navy initiates a massive, decades-long cover-up.
We have to look at how and why they covered this up. Because the 13 survivors were pulled from the water. They were physically debriefed. They literally told naval intelligence that they saw the conning tower of a German submarine break the surface.
Some of them saw the wake of the torpedo right before impact.
They knew exactly what killed their friends.
But the Navy understood the terrifying PR implications. The U.S. is weeks away from declaring total victory in Europe. to admit to the American public that a German U-boat had successfully infiltrated coastal waters and slaughtered 49 sailors just miles from civilian beaches. It would incite massive panic.
It would shatter the illusion of domestic security.
So the military apparatus chose to lie.
They completely gaslighted the survivors. The Navy officially, publicly ruled that the destruction of the USS Eagle 56 was caused by a boiler failure. They blamed it on internal engineering negligence.
Think about the mechanisms of that cover-up. The Navy classified the documents. They isolated the survivors in naval hospitals. They essentially threatened these traumatized men with court-martial if they contradicted the official narrative.
That is sickening.
The survivors are denied their Purple Hearts, and the families of the 49 dead men are sent letters claiming their sons died in a tragic, accidental equipment explosion rather than giving their lives in combat against the enemy.
The psychological torment those 13 survivors endured is staggering. They had to walk through life for decades, knowing the horrific, violent truth of how their friends were murdered, while their own government aggressively denied their reality.
It wasn't until the year 2001, over 50 years after the sinking, that historians and naval researchers finally forced the Navy to review the declassified evidence, formally admit it was a U-boat attack, and posthumously award the Purple Hearts.
Wow. When you synthesize this history, you begin to understand why the legend of the Dash is so potent. Look at what Casco Bay actually is. It is a stretch of ocean that is saturated with hidden violence, covered-up tragedies, mass death, and lost men.
The water itself feels tainted by history.
Exactly. When a community knows, even on a subconscious generational level, that the ocean hides terrible secrets, like a rogue submarine slaughtering men just offshore while the government lies about it for 50 years, it creates an atmosphere of profound paranoia, grief, and mistrust.
And in an environment defined by real-world horror, the legend of a ghost ship like the Dash feels incredibly visceral, logical, and real.
The fog rolling into Casco Bay doesn't just hide a dangerous storm or a rocky reef. It hides rogue submarines. It hides military cover-ups. It hides the ghosts of 1945, and it hides the ghosts of 1815. It all blends into one massive, terrifying, suffocating mythology of the deadly Maine coast.
Which brings us to a haunting reflection on the nature of maritime ghost stories and why we continue to tell them century after century. The ocean is massive, it is untamable, it is completely opaque, and it is brutally indifferent to human life and human grief.
It takes our husbands, our brothers, our sons, and it rarely gives anything back. Not a splinter of wood, not a bone.
It's just the void, the exact same void the families of the Dash stared into.
Right.
Ghost ships are our psychological rebellion against that void. They are our way of demanding that the ocean give something back to us, even if the thing it gives back is a terrifying phantom. We tell the story of the Dash because a ghost, even a harbinger of sudden death, is better than absolute nothingness.
Because a ghost implies they still exist.
Exactly. A ghost implies that the men still exist somewhere in the ether. A ghost means the ocean did not entirely erase them.
That is an incredibly powerful realization. The ghost ship is a monument built out of grief, fog, and rotting wood, standing in defiance of the indifferent sea. And as we wrap up this dark journey, from the frantic, desperate scraping of boiling animal fat onto a wooden hull in 1813, to the freezing, chaotic deaths of 60 men in a black winter hurricane, to the centuries of silent phantom sightings and WWII cover-ups, I want to leave you with one final, deeply unsettling thought to mull over.
What is that?
Think about the biological math of history. The original crew of the Dash was 60 men when they sailed into the storm and vanished in 1815. Over the course of the last 200 years, the families left behind, the descendants of those 60 men, have multiplied. They survived, they had children, and those children had grandchildren and great-grandchildren.
A massive, invisible network of descendants branching out through time.
Exactly. Those bloodlines have spread out from the docks of Freeport, Maine, and have grown into the thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of people living all over the country, all over the world right now.
Oh, wow.
And the rigid rule of the folklore says that the Phantom of the Dash returns specifically for the descendants. So, I leave you to ponder this. How many people alive right now are completely unknowingly tied to that doomed 19th century bloodline?
Maybe some of the people listening right now.
Maybe you are one of them. And what would you do if, one day in the dead of winter, you found yourself standing on the freezing, fog-choked edge of Casco Bay? You heard the hollow, sucking sound of unseen waves crashing against the rocks. You heard the heavy groan of ancient timber. And you looked out into the absolute zero visibility, only to see a silent, speeding wooden ship breaking through the mist, coming to ferry you home.